Hello, welcome everyone to the Cooperative Strategies Initiatives that is bringing together practitioners and academics. My name is Denisa Mindruta from HSC Paris, and I serve as the Associate Program Chair of the Interest Group. I'd like to say that credit should go for this session to Samir Bhatnagar, PhD student at the Indian Institute of Management, and Marvin Hanisch, Assistant Professor at the University of Groningen, who after our brainstorming session at the SMS Annual Conference Business Meeting had the idea to dedicate a session to the latest theoretical and technical developments in digital governance and their strategic implications. I am thrilled that several people from academia and the industry working at the forefront of digital governance have accepted our invitation to join today. Allow me to welcome our main guest, Anthony Day, partner in the IBM's UK and Ireland blockchain team. Anthony leads blockchain transformation and the creation of new business networks for IBM clients across a range of industry sectors. And he has expertise in helping clients use what we call exponential technologies, blockchain, AI, robotics, open platforms, cloud. He also hosts the Blockchain Won't Save the World podcast. So you may be interested to to hear what he says on that broadcast. Also from IBM, joining us today are Curtis Goldsby, Senior Consultant, and Vasileios Theodosiadis, Blockchain Consultant. And please stay tuned because one of the interesting aspects of this session is to understand how consultants and academics can work together. And Curtis, Vasileios, and Hanisch can give you more details about that. Without further ado, Anthony, you are the first. Please, the floor is yours.
Lisa, thank you very much for the kind introduction. Thank you everybody for joining, and thank you everybody watching after the fact on YouTube or wherever you get your streaming content. So I've got 10 minutes and to open up or to introduce the concept of how digital governance is being done differently, or how technologies have changed or given us maybe more ways of thinking about how we manage governance going forward. And I think you've got different ends of the spectrum here, those people who work in and around blockchain. And I'm going to try not to use the word blockchain too much, because I think it always helps to be slightly more objective in terms of what are the digital capabilities that we have, what are the problems that we're trying to solve and the requirements therein, and how do those two things match up? Because if we just start with blockchain as the definition, often that allows us to bring in bias. It allows people to have different perspectives on what that means. To some people, it means Bitcoin and only Bitcoin. To some people, that means only public networks where the node network is fully decentralized. In some cases, that can be people's reference to distributed ledgers and private networks, albeit with some of the similar capabilities. So I spend my time working with this technology quite a lot. But what I find interesting, my career for the longest time has been in digital transformation. I help organizations to solve difficult challenges, usually around growth or improvement. Particularly in the private sector, growth is critically important. And framing what are the choices in terms of who we're going to address, what customers are we going to satisfy, what products are we going to serve, etc. And then importantly, how does technology play a role in enabling how we satisfy those things? Whether that's public sector again or private sector, how are we helping to address the issues of identity management, around security, around verification? More recently, the last 2 years have seen a dramatic acceleration in the way we think about health data certification, data privacy around those things, and the governance, in some cases, of that data. So critically important topics. And why I find working in and around blockchain and distributed ledgers particularly interesting is because it allows us to create infrastructure and standards and automation and rules, governance, if you will, around how we allow a system to evolve or how we allow a system to progress. It allows us to rewrite in code processes or ways of working that today are inefficient or sequential or linear or broken. And so this allows for a technology infrastructure that is transparent to all, open source in most cases, open governance, so the decisions around how changes are made on these platforms are available, transparent, and there for all to see. that they are censor resistant. Again, not particularly censor proof all the way in all the cases, but certainly censor resistant in terms of difficult to take down or change without permission or the involvement of a large number of the members of the network all agreeing at once to be malicious, and so on. Right? And the where to apply these sorts of capabilities is hugely broad. I mentioned some at the beginning in terms of health data, in terms of sustainability, provenance of financial transactions, cross-border payments, settlement and reconciliation between entire governments. This is technology that allows us to create that transparency, a single view of the truth, triple entry accounting for a number of different settings. And when it comes to governance, and from a personal experience, there is a spectrum on which digital governance can exist, right? If you look at some of the private permissioned networks and distributed ledgers, whether that's for trade finance, the likes of WeTrade, whether that's for the provenance of physical goods like food or medicines, where our transparent supply networks, or Food Trust, which is a brand name that's quite well known, where the participants on that network all understand the rules, who gets to see what. Oftentimes it's a kind of read-only or write-only, or read-only and write type of situation in the infrastructure. But also the automation that sits on top of that is transparent. So if you're working on a cloud-based network and you have SAP, you can allow for automated integrations and approvals for certain aspects of invoicing and payments, right? Particularly unattractive, particularly unsexy, particularly mundane. But this allows us to trust in the infrastructure. It allows us to govern by technology rather than by dispute. And in some sectors like the construction industry, which is, in my experience, still relatively slow to adopt decentralized technologies, that is a way of working today that actually people profit from. And so a note of caution around moving from centralized or traditional governance to decentralized or technology-led governance is not everybody benefits from decentralization or disintermediation. And the higher up the chain, where the more power is concerned, the less likely those individuals are to want or to drive change. Try selling blockchain to an estate agent, where information dissymmetry is where they profit, right? So critically important around actually, not just can we do it, but can we encourage, and is there a win-win-win situation for the participants in the network to be able to do it, or to be able to adopt it? Because technology can do anything you want it to, and blockchain at this point in time, distributed ledgers, I believe that we've proven most of the technical concepts around onboarding, around node management, around infrastructure, around smart contracts and smart contract audits, around how can we connect these platforms to traditional legacy technology, how can we look at regulation, all of these things, identity management, wallet management, custody, all of these technical capabilities at this point have been proven. The gap to adoption and scaling actually is more related to the human aspect, which is, can we agree as a group of organizations to adopt this technology to address a problem, right? Which is where a lot of the consortium building you've seen around private networks comes in. And or is there a commercial imperative to do so? Otherwise, people won't change. Facebook has changed its name to Meta for a very deliberate reason, because they have gone all in on a particular segment of the digital social network that they would like to own and capture. Not to say that they're not still going to try and flog Mojaves to your Auntie Jude, and believe me, they will, right? There needs to be a place for people getting social media wrong, and Facebook will continue to be that. But at the other end of the spectrum, they are also looking to sell digital sneakers to digital avatars in the to-be future metaverse. That just feels to them like a bigger pie, and they're going to try and go all in from the start. Now, is that going to be an open source, open governance platform with the same degree of transparency as other public networks? Time will tell. We can all be skeptical on that, and I'm not going to put my foot in this one yet, because we don't know, is the honest truth. But at the other end of the open and transparent spectrum, you have the concept of DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, which is essentially just digital governance on the blockchain. And is a particularly interesting concept because you can craft the tokenomics, you can craft the mechanisms, the means with which that governance is put into place, and have it be open source, transparent, and in code for all to see. So if you have a foundation supporting a protocol, and you would like the improvements based around that protocol to be fully proposed by the community, to be fully voted on by the community, and to be brought in by popular vote, you have a decentralized digital governance mechanism for which to do that. You have to be quite clear that that system cannot be gamed, that you can't end up with small barren ships of token holding where, you know, it is possible to manage or to game the system by mining more tokens or to accruing more tokens, and then as a result creating unnecessary bias. This is the challenge of these public networks, is actually in the architecting and the scaffolding of the governance rules and in some cases the rules to change the rules. It's easier in private networks to do that because it's people and meetings and boardrooms and paperwork and legal entities. In a decentralized and autonomous model, not so easy to change the rules once the code has been cut. Not saying it's impossible, we can fork networks, but it requires greater thinking. And the skills required to deliver these capabilities are different to the ones that we are traditionally used to managing in governance. It's not just common versus civil law. It's not just the different jurisdictional requirements of the particular country in which you're looking at. These networks cross borders. They cross jurisdictions. The foundations in which they operate, or the foundations often put in place as non-profits to manage them, are in a number of different international jurisdictions. And also the capabilities required to develop tokenomics, to think about the happy parts, unhappy parts of these sorts of networks, require thinking around scaling a network effect, around game theory, a number of different skills that probably we're not traditionally used to looking at when we talk about governance, when we study governance at university or in academia. Not saying it isn't all of the time, but it's important to be mindful that actually the people skills required to develop this and deliver this are somewhat different to the traditional operating model, corporate governance, or even civic governance type of skills that we've learned in the past. I hope that's an opening 10 minutes that's interesting to you, that will pique your interest to go deeper, because there is a lot more. Not all of it's covered on my podcast, and that's a shameless plug, but thank you for the shout out to it at the introduction. I do believe that blockchain and decentralized technology will have a significant impact on transforming and reshaping the world that we live in, can have a significant and positive effect for transparency, for driving technology-led change in a lot of the places where it's most needed. And that the barriers to entry for adopting this technology, using it yourself, for starting up an organization, for crowdfunding enough money to be able to deliver a solution using this technology in an open source model with talent all over the world contributing, the barriers have never been lower. So I'm very positive about this space. I hope this was a useful introduction, and I believe there's 5 minutes for questions if anybody has any. And if not, I'm very happy to play lift music for 5 minutes, or let the next speaker build quickly on whatever I said, or tear it down.
Okay, I can start with a question then. So thank you very much, Anthony, for your very interesting insights on blockchains and digital governance. It's great to hear your viewpoint as a consultant. I mean, I'm sure all the people attending the session today have some kind of interest in blockchains. But first, do you think management scholars should pay attention to blockchains and digital governance? And more precisely, what would you tell them to further convince them that, hey, you should work on blockchain, it's a big deal?
That's a great question. Thank you, Fabrice. So I think the domain that you look at here is probably, I would start your Google search by using the term Web3. Web3 describes a full spectrum of re-engineering the way that an interconnected planet of citizens, governments, and organizations fits together. The infrastructure it sits on, the way in which value is transferred, the way in which identity and people's private information is managed. Web3 would be the starting point, I would say, in terms of the domain to look at. There's a load of different places from which to get this information. I would spend a lot of time on YouTube. There are a number of academic and private institutions that are helping people to learn in this space. There's courses at the University of Malta, University of Nicosia, Oxford University has one, Actually, I think it was CoinDesk. If you kind of pickle back about a month on my timeline on LinkedIn, CoinDesk or Cointelegraph put out a top 100 or top 200 universities for blockchain. That's worth a look, because actually you'd be surprised, maybe a number of your alma maters or current universities are already teaching these modules, and that's a great place to look. Also the community, right? So I spend a lot of my time on LinkedIn. If you look at the blockchain hashtag, if you look at the blockchain hashtag on Twitter, or follow any of the socials that you typically look for, you'll see lots of really engaging, really open, really interesting conversation around the topic of blockchain. As a technology in isolation, as I say, it doesn't solve everything. It's infrastructure, it's automation, it's digital assets, it's identity management. It's a lot of different digital capabilities that you can deploy in different models. But let's not forget about cloud and analytics and artificial intelligence and more of the traditional tech stack that sits alongside it. But as a way of thinking about digital transformation, this is the bit that I think is most important, because it helps you think in ecosystems. It helps you think in entire industries at a time, bringing together the capabilities of not just you, but the capabilities or the data or the resources of your suppliers or your customers all together. If you think about the circular economy, this is the critical tenet of how we want to do regenerative industry going forward. So once you open your mind to transforming anything in that ecosystem way or in that circular way, rather than just the little box that is the organization that you work for, that will I hope proliferate the opportunities or the things that you see that we can do differently.
Okay, and you're very optimistic about blockchains, but if we project ourselves like 20 years from now, like in 2040, what do you think the situation will be like? How is blockchains going to change the nature of collaboration?
Wow, that's a really good question. We did a panel back end of last week on kind of 5 years from now, because I think, looking 20 years into the future is almost pointless. Because if you look 20 years back, we would never have imagined we are where we are now. I think the technology we have today redresses the balance of what we can do globally versus domestically, what we can do in an open and decentralized way rather than being run and managed by centralized organizations with specific targets towards growth. If you look at the food network, food supply network, these companies are increasing production, increasing profits, but increasing waste at the same time. Not a particularly sustainable model, but in a centralized capitalist structure, that is what you are incentivized to do. So being able to create incentives and incentive models, reward models that change the less sustainable way that organizations are working today, I think that's hugely powerful. You look at the amount of capital that's flowing into decentralized finance or into protocols, and I'm not talking about ICOs. I just mean retail vanilla investors looking at putting money behind token-based models. There is billions of capital that's been raised outside of the traditional finance system, which I think is hugely powerful, particularly if you're a startup looking to be able to run your own project or your own applications in a technology way. The open network, the open source movement has I think, accelerated the opportunities for the gig economy in terms of being able to help developers, lawyers, advocates, QA engineers, project managers to be able to work not a 9-to-5, not in a single location, to be able to contribute towards a code project or towards something that they might not otherwise have been able to do before that. So from an inclusion perspective, I think that's hugely powerful as well. Everybody can contribute in some way. What does that mean for blockchain? I don't think it actually matters. What I think is important in all of these things is the paradigms that we've changed in terms of how organizations are created, how they're governed, how people can go about doing the jobs they've always tried to do, how we can take out bias, how we can take out censorship, how we can take out abuse by large centralized organizations. Not saying that if we decentralized Uber tomorrow, it would be any better Uber. It might not be. But there are other organizations that if we took some of the control and power away from them, that might be more beneficial to society or individuals over the longer term. So that's what I'm bullish for.
Okay, and as a follow-up question and a final question before turning to Yunjing's questions. So do you think blockchain will mostly change collaboration, like within firms, between firms, both? How, why? Do you have a viewpoint about it?
That's a good question. So it will create new organizations that will compete with traditional ones. The financial services sector is already seeing that. It is already creating greater collaboration between organizations. You know, in IBM alone, we have 100+ networks of, in some cases, traditional competitors, but creating startups together. Right? That ship has already sailed. That has already happened. We have proved that paradigm, you know, beyond a shadow of a doubt. You know, so if I rein it back a little bit, what we have today already is proven patterns, proven models that entire industries can work together to address problems. The important part next is what are the problems they want to get together for, right? Because in some cases it's anti-fraud. In some cases it's mundane things like know your customer regulation, which is purely bureaucratic, purely administrative, but critically important. And it's a cost outplay. Organizations working together to build global platforms to increase access to funding for trade finance for small organizations. Most would say, actually, that's a good thing. If we can get more funding to more organizations, that's more growth, more you know, power to the economy, more power to small businesses, as opposed to those who are already large and funded. You know, those networks already exist today, and many of them. So I think you are only going to see more development of standards and protocols that more in the private sector can adopt. I think you're going to see slow but general acceptance from governments that borderless technology projects around identity are going to be increasingly critical. Vasileios and our colleagues in the Netherlands are working on a number of European initiatives around digital identity today, which are, I think, hugely important, but still just testing the water. And then your decentralized autonomous organizations, your sort of Web3 native businesses that were born into digital assets, cryptocurrencies, DAO models of governance are going to be alternative options for people to dip into as opposed to traditional finance or traditional Web2 businesses that you know, we've already seen people having the choice of which browser they want. Do they want a privacy preserving browser? Do they want a full beans data harvesting browser, or do they want Brave browser? We already have these choices today. It's going to be a question of how much utility can those businesses provide, how much incentive can they provide relative to what people's experience is today. Because ultimately the final point on this is that user experience matters hugely. If people can't understand how to engage with Web3, if it becomes too complicated to manage, you're just not going to see as much of the mainstream adoption. But we're on the case.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, Anthony. Great presentation. Thank you. So I guess my question is it's more around the idea of the adoption and it's more focused on this moment. So right now, where are we in terms of blockchain adoption in the industry, in the real world? And also you mentioned the human aspects. I would like to hear more, like if you could elaborate on that, that'd be great. And also on a relatedly, I'm curious to learn more about in what areas we are already seeing some efficiency gains. Again, some examples would be appreciated.
Perfect. Very happy to do so. And that first question, you couldn't really have teed me up any nicer. Everybody who has a browser open, go to my LinkedIn page. Go to Anthony Day on LinkedIn. There's a few of us, but I'm the one that has a I have an NFT-esque profile picture. It's light blue background and a pixelated image of my face, either one way or the other. On that, my post from today was mapping the adoption of cryptocurrency specifically in line with adoption of the internet. So some information from World Economic Forum overlaid with some data from crypto.com. Somebody's already found it. Thank you. This is where we are, right? So if you look at that general curve, we are mapping almost perfectly the first 6 or 7 years adoption of the internet. Now, in the comment section, and I don't propose we go into the comment section here, but if you were to, you'd start to see some discussion here around what's going to be the breakout moment. Because if we're now at, this is the scale on the right-hand side is actually a sort of slightly exponential, and whereas the line looks linear. Actually, in 2 or 3 years' time, we might need to see 2 or 3 times or 3 to 4 times the number of blockchain or crypto wallet users in the world if we're to continue on track. What is it that is going to continue to increase that adoption, right? And so at the moment, what you've seen is the early stage investors, the people kind of aping into cryptocurrencies as it's an investment vehicle to some extent, because retail payments isn't really that significant globally for digital assets. You've seen the breakout of non-fungible tokens, NFTs, people investing in art projects or in token projects from, everything from Banksy to Playboy, right? And there are a number of brands that are, issuing these tokens because those things are meaningful to their customer bases. We can expect some increase from that perspective. And I think from the gaming world as well, whether it's esports or Farmville, right, having a wallet where you have digital tokens that can exist outside of the native environment where the game developers traditionally used to love you staying, right? Because those are their native currencies. They want you to buy V-Bucks or game tokens for yours. They want in-app purchases because that's how they generate their revenue. They don't want those tokens going off property. But that's not really the direction of travel now. So from this particular perspective, right, number of individual users adopting wallets, those at this point, I believe, something that creates experiential utility and possibly a social media player. Think TikTok, but with crypto wallets, could become something that also drives crazy adoption that we might not see coming yet. I'm not saying it's going to be Meta, because we don't know what Meta exactly is going to propose, but an app that is as socially addictive as TikTok, but with mechanics around tokenization or play to earn, might see dramatic adoption the same way we saw with Pokemon Go, for example. So that's the societal view. The enterprise view on this is, as at IBM, we've got over 100 live business networks. You've seen every one of the largest enterprises. I think it's something like 80% of the top 100 companies has some blockchain projects live, depending on how you cut it, depending on whose definition of top 100 companies there are. Go check out Blockdata. Blockdata, a Dutch company, they do some really nice visuals on this stuff. They've got a number of different infographics of who's using what, which companies are using which, is it Hyperledger Fabric? By far at this point, the most used enterprise platform for DLT, at least. You'll see Ethereum in there, you'll see Quorum in there, you'll see a little bit of Corda in there, you'll see a few others sort of poking around. We've also got a number of standards initiatives that are still helping us to kind of go beyond creating our own custom networks to either jumping into public and permissionless networks where standards between companies are already predefined. That's always a hard part of it. Or where the definitions of things like token standards or data models or identity verification standards are still just starting to creep through. And that's going to be the difference between these sort of networks existing in isolation and still generating value, and I'll get onto the what kind of value in a minute, to actually having global networks that anybody can dip in and out of. Baseline protocols trying to do that, for example, with standardizing some of the sort of the typical workflows in an enterprise, like procurement or like finance management, which are, again, you would believe standardized to some extent, but actually not quite so much. Again, depends on the jurisdiction or the regulation you're looking at. So oftentimes the barrier for adoption in enterprise is the existence or the time it takes to define standards against which, you can't do anything unless you have standards. If you can standardize, you can digitize. If you can digitize, you can automate. If you can automate, you can demonetize or reduce the cost of delivering that activity. Think digital photography. If you can demonetize, you can increase participation, and then you can decentralize the activity. But you can't do all of this stuff up here if you haven't done the stuff down here first, because the systems just won't work. The token standards won't work and the automation won't work. What are the business benefits of, every single industry has its exemplars at this point in taking and using blockchain or decentralized or distributed ledger technology. And in every case, it's somewhat different. If you look at provenance, trust in data, single source of truth, you can look at reducing risk, reducing waste, You can look at streamlining supply chains, supply chain efficiency. You can look at brand trust. You can look at surfacing that data to customers or governments or regulators, which either reduces the cost of regulation or increases the transparency and can drive revenue, which increases loyalty. You can look at some very acute examples in healthcare, which is if you can verify digitally doctors' credentials, you can move them from hospital to hospital without having to go through a month's worth of new training for stupid stuff like fire drills. Not that fire drills are stupid, but having to redo the training from one hospital to another, which may be a half a day's training. You're basically losing a month's worth of effectiveness from a doctor over the course of a year because they're having to redo administrative tasks, right? To cross-border health verification. I'm not saying that I'm pro or against COVID passes and COVID certificates, but the free movement of people with digital verification of status and identity in this particular landscape is important. And again, the risk, the cost associated with that, if we can digitize and standardize that activity, is significant. So lots to play for in the what are the benefits and where.
Oh, this is very, very interesting, Anthony. Thank you for all these clarifications, and thank you, Fabrice and Ying, that you asked such insightful questions. It's no wonder because you both work on these issues related to governance and blockchain. And now I would like to allow Curtis, Marvin, and Vasileios to share a little bit about their experience in working together on these issues.
Absolutely.
Curtis?
Yeah, let's get started. So hello, everyone, and welcome to this next presentation titled Digital Governance, How Blockchain Technologies Reshape the Governance of Interorganizational Relationships. So my name is Curtis Goldsby, and I'm kind of in this double agent role. I have a PhD role, doing a PhD at Rotterdam School of Management. I'm also a consultant at IBM, and together with my colleagues here in the call, Marvin Hanisch from the University of Groningen and Vasileios Theodosiadis from IBM. I'm very pleased to present some of our ongoing research that we have on this matter. And we started working together around 2019. And as a matter of fact, I'd like to actually build on some of the points touched upon by Anthony earlier in the area of enterprise blockchains, and add a bit of an academic angle to this as well on what we've been researching. So thank you very much for having us. And the agenda covers the following 4 points. So I'd like to just start off with the partnership that Marvin, Vasileios, and I have with the University of Groningen and IBM. I'd also like to give an overview of the research on enterprise blockchains. We have 4 prominent areas that we'd like to just show to you today. And I'll also close with the bottom line of our research, essentially conclusion of some of the most important points. So let's start off with going over who we are, why this partnership exists, and what we've done so far. So I've already mentioned we're Marvin, Curtis, and Vasileios. We have Marvin on the academic side as a professor in the Innovation Management and Strategy Department at the University of Groningen. Myself, working at RSM as a PhD student, but also at IBM as a consultant. And then we have Vasileios, who's from IBM and who works in blockchain consulting. He's an expert in this area, particularly when it comes to digital identities and digital assets. And so it's quite a multidisciplinary team. And what we've been doing since 2019 is conducting academic research on emerging technologies, but currently with a very strong focus on enterprise blockchains. And we root this research in existing academic literature on governance and of course, try to develop insights that hopefully help practitioners make better decisions in this space. And we've collected a lot of data so far within IBM, but also outside of IBM, and have produced some papers in this regard. And today we're going to summarize some of the findings, which we'll go through now. So what are we studying when it comes to enterprise blockchains, and just touching upon some of the challenges that were mentioned earlier when we're looking at this, especially from a governance angle? I think it's important to note that riding this wave of blockchains is quite challenging for firms. So I'll just blend in some of the quotes that demonstrate the challenges that come with deciding to pursue this technology. So for instance, there's still many basic concerns whether to adopt blockchains in the first place. The technology being quite strategic, but also highly political. There's also growing complexity around governance. So how do you agree on governance matters with partners? Do you try to embed governance on chain or off chain? How do you deal with these central authorities, as mentioned earlier, who might try to control most of the network's developments? And finally, of course, related to governance is spurring collaboration with competitors. So how do you get competitors in the same room, make decisions that benefit the entire network when some organizations might have a different agenda or their own agenda? And our research aims at tackling some of these challenges related to blockchain governance. And we'll give a brief overview of the 4 streams of research that we've been pursuing in this regard. So we cover both broader and more narrow areas in our research. And first, we look at how platforms and blockchains create what we call these novel hybrid forms of governance that combine aspects of intermediation with those of disintermediation. In the second stream of research, we develop more general governance modes of enterprise blockchains. So assuming that we have these administrative governance layers on top of the blockchain to deal with coordination and control issues. Third, we look at how blockchain governance decisions are driven by different dimensions of scope. And finally, as part of the research, we also study what leads to consortia formation in enterprise blockchains. We study when and why enterprise blockchains are often complemented with these more hierarchical governance structures, what leads to that. So I'll now dive into each of these topics and just give a very brief overview of why we studied the topic and what we found. So in the first paper, we did an in-depth case study of a digital global trade network. So we studied this global trade network because it was really interesting how, basically we were interested in how platforms as network intermediators and blockchains as network disintermediaries come together in a single solution. And what we found is that the two can actually be combined into new hybrid digital governance forms, which we based around distinct trust and control dynamics that occur throughout the platform's growth journey. You can see that to good effect on the left side. Specifically, the solution was started as a purely platform intermediated model and was then devolved more and more towards a blockchain disintermediated model. So switching from competence-based trust towards more system trust. And this shift of system trust and control towards the network gave room for competitors to join the network, and then which in turn spurred growth of the solution. So important takeaway on this one was that to get competitors to collaborate, the blockchain actually played a huge role that allowed certain permissions and data security as well. In our next line of research, we conducted over 150 interviews. So this was with IBMers, but also outside of IBM, of course, with blockchain executives, and found that managers need to be aware of different kinds of governance approaches of enterprise blockchains. So this was recently accepted in California Management Review. We'll happily share the link also once it becomes available to the attendees and beyond. So in this article, we found that the networks that were most successful were the ones where underlying coordination and control issues were clearly understood at the onset. So we suggested then for managers to choose between one of the 4 modes we called chief, clan, custodian, consortium based on the organization's environment. And we also suggested that it's on the right side, that navigating the governance of blockchains also requires a dynamic approach, and that choosing just one of these is not enough. It requires constant adaptation. So for instance, we mentioned the example of TradeLens, which started in an attempt by Maersk and IBM, but then later expanded the collaboration model to other ocean carriers, essentially competitors of Maersk. And so in sum, we found that blockchain governance does require an understanding of coordination and control issues that then evolve with the network over time. Our third study is based on interviews with 60 blockchain projects where we identified blockchain scope as a key governance decision. And we researched this because blockchains, they have a high variance in the supporting governance structure. And our question was, how do network participants then balance the tension between cooperation and competition using governance? And from our interviews, we found that participation, information, and decision scope are the crucial dimensions here of setting the blockchain governance scope. So for example, when we're speaking of large OEMs, big concern was always when they have extremely proprietary data, They were nervous that competitors might use that opportunistically in some way, so relating to information scope. But we also had examples for decision scope, where, of course, just because data is updated in a blockchain doesn't mean that you have the same access rights and the same level of visibility. But these are things that, of course, need to be managed so that these decisions are understood. So our takeaway was that participation, information, and decision scope are critical when making decisions around governance in this matter. And for the last study we teasered today, we studied over 100 blockchain projects empirically, and we wanted to better understand why blockchain consortia emerged. And we wanted to find out why some blockchains, enterprise blockchains, are governed by more centralized governance layers, and why others have their governance set up in a more decentralized way. And we found that decentralized networks, they're often complemented by these hierarchical structures, and that these structures are more likely to be introduced given certain coordination and control issues. For instance, we had many firms in our data set where the sheer number of founders and the rivalry among these founders, it needed to be managed in some way, which typically a consortium would have reduced that complexity. So just coming to the bottom line, and hopefully we're on time with that. And just giving you a quick summary of all these findings that, in my opinion, are also worth keeping in mind. So it's important to consider disentangling certain aspects between blockchains and platforms. We found that they can also fuse into these hybrid forms. For example, we saw in the global trade case that we studied that the characteristics of a multi-sided platform can blend with the blockchain characteristics, which makes for really interesting phenomenon when the two are studied jointly, particularly from a governance standpoint. The next point was that it's also important to understand there's no one size fits all when it comes to blockchain governance. So they do vary in their governance scope. And we found that participation, information, and decision scope were the key dimensions here. And for example, in a lot of the interviews we conducted, participants also mentioned how these areas are often sources of conflict. So not letting certain members join or having conflicting decisions that benefit one group over another were aspects that were considered important here. Third, even though the idea of blockchain is about decentralization, it's often touted as such, in the enterprise context, we're still seeing a long journey ahead where you need to couple these blockchains with hierarchical governance layers, be it consortia or other modes of governance as outlined in our CMR paper. And for example, we also mention the case of Ariane, a blockchain that is bringing together many players in the luxury watch space, essentially competitors, to provide a record of digital ownership to users. They have a consortium around this to manage this. Finally, what is often also overlooked is that governance of these networks is often dynamic. So while some firms might start blockchains on their own for their own internal purposes, others might try to get a whole network of firms on from the start. And regardless what is the case, these governance structures, they often need to evolve over time as the network environment changes. So for example, in the TradeLens case that we mentioned in the CMR, we perfectly saw how this initial governance setup that may be beneficial to get the network kind of rolling and a first iteration of the blockchain built, having this working product, but then this can alienate other players from joining, which of course then requires an adjustment in governance, as we've seen in that case. So this sums it up, and I do hope you enjoyed the presentation. It was a bit more academic on that side, and thank you very much for your attention. And yeah, I'm not sure if we want to do the Q&A now or possibly asynchronous, because we do have other points on the agenda. So let me know how you would like to handle that.
Yeah, if I can comment. Curtis, yes, thank you so much for the presentation. I think we have time for probably a couple of questions. So if anybody would like to have a question, they could just raise their hand and mute and ask the presenters for any question.
So maybe while we are waiting for questions on the content, I don't know if Marvin or Vasileios would like to discuss a little bit how this collaboration has emerged, because it's not very usual to see academics and consultants working together on academic papers. And I think that that's a very interesting angle and something that we wanted to discuss in this session. So it's really up to you, but I would like this aspect to be discussed, and then allow people to ask questions on these very interesting topics and insights that you got on the governance in blockchain networks.
Yeah, hello everyone, good day. Thanks Anissa for the question. I'm Vasileios Theodosiadis. I'm blockchain consultant at IBM in the Netherlands. And I think it's a very good question. So I think everything started back in September 2019. So a colleague from the office here and myself from the research committee wanted to study more about governance, business value and technology of IBM commercial engagements. And we expected to have a rich data set, and we were thinking like how we can expand our frameworks how can we expand our frameworks, study these engagements, find common characteristics, challenges, and also at the end, the ultimate goal was to improve client engagements. So at that time, we had a very good collaboration, very successful collaboration with the University of Groningen and the Computing Science Department, working on some technical topics on blockchain. And in the meantime, actually, we have a very strong team, delivery team in Groningen for IBM, contributing to a lot of European and not only projects. So the next natural step for us was to reach out to the Faculty of Economics and Business and see actually what they could offer. And a colleague and myself sent an email to Marvin back then. And so we quickly set up the first physical face-to-face meeting at the Groningen office, where we actually got impressed by Marvin's profile, a contribution to top management papers. And then since the first meeting, actually, we realized that Marvin is pretty committed with a lot of great ideas. And then we said, let's start and create a joint team here in the Netherlands and see like how we can collaborate, how we can onboard even interns to help us with our research. So I think that was the idea behind what you saw also at Curtis slides and how this journey started a bit more than 2 years ago.
Thank you, Vasileios. And I think that's a perspective from IBM. If I just go across the table, Marvin, what are the kind of experience you had, and what are the challenges which you faced when you started working with consultants and industry? You know, so they approached you with a certain objective, but then how was your experience from the academia, and what kind of lessons you'd had for some of our other colleagues from academia about working with industry or with consultants? Marvin?
Thank you very much, Samir. And also thank you, Vasileios, for these kind words. I don't know if I deserve them, but it was interesting. When I first received Vasileios' email, I was thinking, okay, this must be spam email. You know, why would IBM, a Fortune 500 firm, reach out to me? But I quickly realized that the technical challenges around blockchain were becoming a lesser concern over the time, and it was really the governance issues that were now playing out. And that's where I felt I could collaborate and with them and also contribute to this research project. For me, the main challenge in the beginning was understanding what IBM wants or what their incentive schemes are, because they're usually not writing papers for the Academy of Management journal. That's usually not what they want. And understanding their problems and then reframing those into academic research questions. And for me, it was usually the question that come from practice are what questions. So what do we need to do? What kind of governance do we need to do? Whereas as an academic, I'm more interested in how or why questions. So we had to bring these two basic questions together and try to find a mutually beneficial way of framing these questions. So that was probably the main challenge for me, finding that common ground. But there is a common ground. It's not that we are in totally separate worlds. And the way we progressed was that we started with a very practitioner-oriented book chapter that we wrote together, which helped me understand the topic and the problem set better. And at the same time, it also had this academic element in there where we tried to generalize certain issues. And from there on, we really developed a common interest in developing research, and we found that we have complementary skills. IBM has this great internal database on blockchains, and I could bring in my experience working with data and data analysis to really leverage that and create new insights that could also feed back into IBM's practice. So that was kind of how we emerged as a team. I don't know if you want to add anything, Curtis, to that.
No, I actually joined a bit later, so you already got the ball rolling pretty well.
Thanks, Marvin and Curtis. Christina had a question on the earlier discussions. Christina, would you like to unmute and ask your question to the presenters? Christina?
It's okay. I'm gonna read that question because that was early. So and this is something that I often get from my PhD students as well. So Christina's question was, it was in relation to Anthony's presentation, and she said, how should blockchain and sustainability be positioned, at least not contradict each other? Crypto, Bitcoin being perceived as notorious energy wasters and decentralization being the backbone of both.
Do you want me to jump in on this one, or does anyone else want to have a go?
You go on, I also have a 2 cents on this, but I guess you will answer those or take that up anyway.
You throw your 2 cents in first, Marvin, and if I have a different perspective, I'll come in after you.
Yeah, okay, right. So there is probably this sense based on this media hype around Bitcoin that blockchain is just this huge pollutant. I'm in the Netherlands, and the similarity between the Netherlands and Bitcoin is that we consume the same amount of energy, you know, at a national level as Bitcoin. So that's concerning, of course. But at the same time, in the enterprise realm, you don't need the same sort of consensus mechanism that you have in Bitcoin. And as a result, the pollution that comes from these enterprise blockchains is a lot less and less concerning. But at the same time, at least that's what I hear in the enterprise realm, many blockchain providers are now concerned about the label of blockchain in their services they offer. And often now they abandon the label that they use blockchain in favor of something else, a more generic IT solution that is backed by blockchain, but they don't communicate that openly. So that is perhaps something to greenwash the blockchain, even though it's not even necessary in these private blockchains.
That's a really good start, Marvin. Again, a good setup here. I think that there's two ways to look at this one. There is the sustainability of blockchains, and there is blockchain and its application to support tracking, management, and acceleration of sustainable activity in industry. Not to over-egg the definition of this one. The sustainability of blockchains, the point that Marvin mentioned, I think there are a number of different platforms that are more or less computationally expensive. So Bitcoin and proof of work, yes. But if you look at the large majority of which enterprises are using which platforms, it's more in the enterprise space, at least Hyperledger Fabric, which the consensus and the kind of proof of authority type consensus mechanism is more around the cost of refreshing a web page, right? So it's no more computationally expensive than anything else on the internet today. We've then just got to address, actually, as businesses, do we have green clouds to the best of our ability? Are we using data centers as efficiently as possible? Do we have servers that are on all the time that we're not using? And can we be regenerative in supporting sustainability programs outside of our computational use? Right? Because whether we like it or not, we're going to be using electricity, we're going to be using kilowatts. We've just got to try and make those as sustainable and renewable as possible. Other end of the spectrum, blockchains to support sustainability, huge amounts of opportunity for using transparent, open source, publicly demonstrable technologies. So there are organizations like, I'm trying to think of the name now. Anyway, there are a few who specifically tokenize sustainability projects so that they can get access to crowdfunding, so that they can demonstrate on chain that certain activities have happened, whether that be beach cleanups, whether that be planting of trees, etc., etc. How do we standardize and create the data models for social impact, tokenize those and make the data available in a transparent public network? Ditto when we're looking at the end-to-end connected supply chain, right through from raw materials into finished goods and retail. If we don't have a way to join up and prevent the tampering of data across global supply chains, it's going to be difficult for us to first track, second measure, and third incentivize or penalize those organizations who are or are not doing well. So an open, transparent, standardized, cloud-based global ledger would be a good place to start for that. And I didn't use the B word once, I hope.
Thanks, Anthony. I think we are almost at the close of the session. So I know, Stephen, does that address part of your question as well? And then maybe move to the concluding remarks.
Yeah. So Stephen, unless you want to follow up on these issues of sustainability.
Yeah, my question is very simple. Has proof of stake been shown to be technically viable? Because I know proof of stake can solve a lot of the sustainability problems that exist with blockchain.
The 30-second version of this is that proof of stake and sharding or other layer 2 mechanisms for scalability or increasing throughput are far less computationally expensive than proof of work. If you can bundle up transactions, if you can do roll-ups, you can reduce the number of data transactions, data packages that go into the network. So as a result, you reduce the computational power. Whether you would call that sustainable, from again, from a carbon neutral or a footprint neutral perspective, I think there's more that needs to be done beyond just the consensus mechanism.
Great. So thank you, Anthony, and thanks everyone. Robin, do we have a few minutes to conclude? I believe we said we're gonna end at well 3 p.m. This is 3 p.m. my time, so within 1 hour, and the time is up. I would like to give to our guests the last the opportunity to conclude with the last words. So please go ahead in whatever order you would like to. And yes, thank you, Anthony. I know you have to go.
First of all, thank you everyone for joining this webinar and for your questions and for participating in this seminar. The idea is that we hope we could show that practitioner-oriented research or collaboration with practitioners is also academically rigorous research, and that there is a huge opportunity to work with organizations at all these at the technical forefront of blockchain, AI, digital transformation in general. And that is something we really enjoy doing, and we have just a really cool team. It's great fun to work with Vasileios and Curtis, and we have this pipeline of exciting projects. If you have questions, perhaps how to approach a firm or how to collaborate, always feel free to reach out to us. I'm always happy to have a call or email that's always possible. So thank you very much, especially to Curtis and to Anthony for this great presentation, and for Fabrice and Ying for the questions, and Denise, of course, for guiding us through this meeting.
Yeah, it was wonderful to see everyone here, and I know there's already a community now working on these topics. As I said, Fabrice and Ying being already present, and there are others. So we would welcome this type of meetings where so beyond the digital governance topic, we also welcome other suggestions on how to discuss collaborations between academics and practitioners or consultants. So if you have ideas, please let us know. The cooperative strategies IGs, by default encourages topics on such collaborations. Have a great day wherever you are, and thank you for joining again.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.